Our next speaker is the co-author of 4 books of nonfiction. His latest is called The Once and Future World, and it has just been released. It's available through all the usual channels. His previous works you might have heard of. One was called The 100-Mile Diet with Alisa Smith. It was a bestseller and recognized by most as the catalyst of the local food movement. Another book he wrote was called I Live Here with Mia Kirshner and artist Michael Simons and Paul Shoebridge. Described as a paper documentary about displaced people. It made top 10 lists from the Bloomsbury Literary Review right through to comic book resources. And finally, his book, Dead Man in Paradise, the story of a priest assassinated in the Dominican Republic. It won the Charles Taylor Prize, which is Canada's highest prize for literary nonfiction. Please welcome J.B. Mackinnon.
Thanks, Stephen. And just to bring myself down a notch after that introduction, this first slide, which is coming soon, is my older brother, Sasha. And the only thing he ever had to say about the popularity of the 100-Mile Diet was, "Thank you for making onions cost $6 a pound at the farmer's market." So he's in a dress in this photo. I am still eating a mainly local food diet, but I decided to dig through my cupboards for all the non-local items. And so there's olive oil, maple syrup, a few things. And I still haven't found a local producer of haggis-flavored potato chips. So I'm still totally dependent on imported food at this point. But my newest book is, it's not really about food, it's about the history of nature and what that tells us about nature today. And for me, that all started here on the grasslands outside of Kamloops where I grew up. And I spent all my time out there hoping to see the biggest, baddest animal on the landscape, which was this guy, bad old red fox. And but I looked into the history of the landscape and I discovered that there used to be much bigger animals out there. Elk, caribou, wolves, maybe even bison. And instead of the red fox, the biggest, baddest beastie would have been this guy, the grizzly bear. So this is when I realized that the history of nature is personal, because I started thinking, well, I think I would have been a different kind of human being if I'd grown up on a landscape with grizzly bears instead of red foxes. And, I started thinking, well, I'd probably be better at negotiating the price of a used car, things like that. This is an example of the history of nature in Vancouver. In 2010, a gray whale swam right up False Creek and thrilled people from all walks of life. There's a great video online taken by a skateboarder who describes the whale as sick all the time. It's so big, it's sick. What people didn't realize is that there used to be hundreds of whales in this area. And this is where the history of nature becomes so important, because if you're not aware that there were whales here in the past, then their absence will seem normal. But if you do become aware that they were present in the past, then their absence will seem abnormal. And that's the point where you might want to do something about it. And of course, this is what happened to those hundreds of whales. They were all killed by 1908. And as usual, the man responsible was wearing a bowler hat. Sign of the apocalypse, of my opinion. So how much has nature changed? There's a researcher in Florida who found this trove of photographs of big game fishermen, all taken on the same dock between the 1950s and today. So this, sort of cast of the beachcombers here, this is 1958, and that's 2007. So I think you can see some of the differences there, but one of the things the researcher pointed out is that in all of the photos through the decades, the fishermen, even as they catch smaller and smaller fish, their smiles of pride and joy remain the same. So we really do forget over the generations what nature used to look like. And this is my dad, and he at some point came in and said, all this material you're working on is super depressing. And then he died, which didn't help. But I got you laughing at that, wow. But he reminded me I needed to get out of the library and back out into nature. And this is a top half of a car ad, which depicts species like the whatchamacallit and the blue-winged thingamabob. And they, of course, see the solution to our reconnection to nature as being buy an SUV. But I decided to do something different. So I went down to Trout Lake. I sat down at the edge of the water, and I just paid attention to nature for 1 hour. And I had this amazing experience. I saw this huge bird that I later identified as the beaked thing. And it was hunting ducks at a Trout Lake, wild Trout Lake. And I found this guy who'd had a similar experience, but actually took photographs of it in Washington. And he watched these two eagles in aerial combat for 10 minutes. And then he cut, this photo is actually the two eagles colliding over the surface of the water. And what this photographer wanted to point out was that during all of this drama, no one else around the lake even noticed this was happening. And I noticed this at Trout Lake as well. So the red arrow is pointing to a guy who's spending, while all of this is playing out, in all the photos, he's just looking at his smartphone, probably texting something like, hey man, maybe I'll see an eagle today. One of the eagles wiped out into the water and almost drowned, but it managed to get back up in the air, fly to this tree, and the photographer writes that this bedraggled eagle symbolizes America in its current trials. Yeah. So, how important is it to pay attention to nature? The red arrow points to a period of several centuries when native Hawaiians were living in total isolation from the rest of the world, but with a large human population, and yet we're sustaining a very high degree of natural abundance. So how did they do that? Well, they had very strong personal relationships with nature. So this is a guy I met in Hawaii whose family has traditional responsibility for that species of plant that he's holding. And also, he has fabulous, fabulous hair. But Hawaii has become a kind of a symbol of where we've gotten in the globe, because it's gone from this place where everybody connected their sense of survival with the health of the environment, and then it's gone to this place where people connect their sense of survival to signs saying, "Beware falling coconut." And with that, I'm just going to leave you with the world's shortest reading from a book. It remains, this is page 84, it remains a beautiful world. Thanks very much.